Hello, my name is Francis Coliato, your Executive Director at Visual Communications. In our work to create spaces for expression, engagement, and empowerment, VC and our partners proudly present the Asian Pacific Virtual Showcase. It is our hope that this showcase of our stories will be a start for audiences to rediscover our humanity. In solidarity with our partners, our collective movements not only exhibit actions towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, but our anti-racist work to uplift storytellers who use the power of media to dismantle supremacist structures. Thank you for joining us today as we continue to move forward in uplifting and connecting our communities. Welcome to the Asian Pacific Virtual Showcase.
Hi, I'm Renee Tajima-Peña. I'm a filmmaker and professor of Asian American Studies at UCLA. I'm the co-producer with Jeff Chang of the May 19th Solidarity Project, and I'm calling in from Los Angeles on Tongva land.
Hi, I'm Steve Maing, and I'm a filmmaker in Queens, New York, former Lenape native lands. Happy to be here joining this great project.
My name's Tadashi Nakamura. I'm an independent documentary filmmaker based in LA, which is on Tongva land, as well as a father, husband, son, uncle, and trying to get some sleep while I can. Steve, actually, this is I don't think we've actually met in person, but I've heard a lot about you. I'm a fan of your work, and I think that was actually one of the things that, I mean, besides the purpose of this project, the fact that it was this kind of all-star lineup of Asian American artists and activists was kind of like an opportunity I didn't want to miss out on. So yeah.
Likewise. I was so pleased to hear your name, and obviously your father has a rich history in the field. So it's very cool to get to connect over this.
So I think we're just gonna kind of talk amongst ourselves. But I got involved in the project through Renee. And so maybe Renee, if you want to just talk about maybe explain what the project is and maybe explain how it evolved to where it is right now.
Well, the kernel of the idea was the Nite Democracy Project, which Ted and I worked on with Sean Miura and other people. Ted, do you want to talk about the Nite Democracy Project? It's kind of like a similar approach.
Yeah, I think for us as filmmakers, I think a lot of us work on long form pieces, right? Like most of the films I've worked on have taken years. I'm currently working on a film that's in year 3, and part of me kind of feels like, in a way, that it's kind of paralyzing because you can't do things immediately. And I think so when Nikkei Democracy Project evolved, it was something where we felt as filmmakers that we can kind of do something immediately. We didn't have to wait for funding, grant proposals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Kind of do something quick and dirty, but also to create something for an online space, which is very different than our long form stuff, which is usually meant for people to watch in a theater, versus like a phone or a laptop. So the Nikkei Democracy Project was a way for us to kind of address, really not necessarily address our own history for our sake as Asian Americans or as Japanese Americans, but to draw parallels specifically for the undocumented communities, the migrant communities, the Muslim and Arab American communities that at that time and currently are still being under attack. And we wanted to kind of create solidarity through our stories to show both our history as well as present day relevance of those stories, and how we need to come together and fight that as a multiple kind of coalition of solidarity.
No, it was very similar. Nikkei Democracy Project was started in after the November 2016 election and in early 2017. Same kind of thing, a rapid response to a time of crisis. because the Muslim ban was being instituted. And we all got together and said, we're Japanese American. We have this story of detention, and, which was, and racism. And why don't we use our story, like reversion, different films like Tad's films or my films or Bob's films to be relevant today. And so we made these short, just like 2-minute videos that went up on the web and social media, like on Facebook and IG and everything. And so this project, the May 19th Solidarity Project, was very similar. It's, I think a lot of us were disturbed, and the idea was just in March, and it's going up May 19th. Like, it's kind of crazy. It was so fast because we're producing 14 videos, and not including all the kind of image text posts we're also producing. But a lot of us, were concerned that these viral videos of Black and brown assailants of older Asians were being going out on social media. And we knew there was violence and there were these incidents, but the way it was going out was really kind of sus. And actually, we found out, Jeff Chang, who we're working with, found out that, the University of Michigan, Melissa Borsha, is doing a study, and she found that in these incidents of anti-Asian hate, it's overwhelmingly white predators. But that's not, the narrative that we're seeing. So people were concerned. I would talk to Jeff Chang, who's a cultural strategist and a writer. He's also been, in the film space with We're Gonna Be All Right. His book was made by Bao Nguyen into a ITDS, a PBS digital series. So we were talking about this, and my first idea was, well, I want to do a long form documentary on Black Asian solidarity, that whole history, to, kind of really give this other part of the narrative. And then we're thinking, that's going to take years, right? So especially if I'm doing it, it's really going to take years. So we thought, well, let's do something fast. And, I remembered like Nikkei Democracy Project. We were able to do these short videos and, look at this history and look at today, and, really make a statement quickly, and, just get to a lot of people very quickly. And Sean Miura, who's a digital strategist, really kind of helped us think about like how to strategically get things out on the web. And so Jeff and I started this May 19th Solidarity Project, and then just grew with all these people like in the social media strategy space, and in filmmaking and philanthropy and Asian American studies and activism. And so I called Steve and Tad, and whose films I loved, I knew as like really fantastic filmmakers, and we had to like produce this stuff. I called, we got, I think it was just a month ago, we got funding. And then like I had just 5 days or something to get a team together. And, somebody was looking down on me from heaven, and these guys were just available, maybe not completely available, but they made themselves available, along with, these with other filmmakers. And so we were just, they've already been, Steve has already shot, and Tad's already, rough cut 2 pieces. It's like just, really fast and furious.
Yeah, Steve, can you kind of talk about how you got involved, and also too maybe same thing with me, kind of, how your trajectory of your other films kind of organically fall in line with the mission.
Yeah. Well, when I got the call from Renee, I felt like, the universe had almost been reading my mind, because I was thinking so much about these acts of anti-Asian violence, and how it felt so much like a redux of how white media had exploited the LA riots, and how that there was this kind of like exploitation of the Black on Asian violence narrative, like you were talking about, Renee. And I was immediately struck because a lot of my work around looking at policing and the discriminatory structural problems of policing is also, you know, directly connected to this idea of how the power structures that we have to navigate seek to divide and control and conquer, so to speak. And so when this project came up, and specifically the story that Renee asked if I might be interested in looking at, I was immediately drawn to that because, you know, I do feel like, you know, a lot of my work is not, I try not to make work about like my Asianness, right? Or these kind of like do sort of overt self-reflective work necessarily, but it's, you know, it is absolutely driven by my identity as an Asian and a Korean American maker. And, you know, I never talked about this, and I never foreground my identity politics when I was making Crime and Punishment. You know, it was absolutely through and through about the Black and Latino whistleblower officers who were being targeted by the system and who were being asked to target their communities. But, you know, sort of like the ghost story, as the great late Jonathan Oppenheim, editor, would talk about, like sort of the narrative that drives you and compels you to do the work that you do. Is like my ghost story was very much about this idea, like it is an absolute fallacy that, you know, Asian Americans don't take deep interest in the struggle and tragedy of other communities, because our journeys are not the same, but they exist in parallel, and there are very symbiotic kinds of experiences that inform each other and play off of each other, that are important to show like a shared commitment to understanding. So the story, which I'm sure we're going to dive into our particular projects, really struck a nerve for me, because it was sort of like a more direct manifestation of this idea of like the ghost story that drives a lot of the work I do. You know, trying to tap into, you know, what is this idea of trauma, collective trauma, you know, structural bias, experiences as Asians we're well acquainted with, but play out and reveal themselves in very different ways in other communities as well.
Can you describe what the story is that you're doing?
Sure. So this piece that I'm doing is the story of basically like a parallel loss, tragedy, and ultimately empowerment. So a Hmong refugee immigrant named Yua Vang Lee, her son Fang Lee, when he was 18, was shot in the back 3 times, and then 5 more times after he collapsed on the ground, and ultimately died at the hands of Minneapolis police. They claimed that there was a gun. Ultimately, there was a lot of evidence that disproved the gun that mysteriously appeared after the security surveillance camera dropped out and then reemerged. And so this death of Fang Lee obviously triggered a huge reaction within the Hmong community. And one of the first communities to then respond and identify a kind of common struggle and tragedy were members of the Black activist community in Minneapolis. And they came and shared their strategic knowledge, their compassion, and supported the Lee family through the entire trial. What is really, you know, just in a way beautiful and so moving about the story is that fast forward to after the murder of George Floyd, there was some debate within the Hmong community as to whether or not they as a community should support one of the officers involved who was Hmong, among community members as well, who had not intervened. He stood there idly, he defended and did crowd control as Derek Chauvin proceeded to press his knee on George Floyd's neck. And so within that community discussion and debate emerged a singular voice, Mrs. Bang, who stepped up and said, no, our duty, our obligation is to speak out on behalf of our Hmong community in support of George Floyd and his family, and justice for the Black Lives Matters movement. And so she gave a stirring speech at the steps of the Capitol at this very important and kind of momentous moment where the organization Hmong for Black Lives kind of coalesced almost overnight and had a huge presence at the steps of the Capitol. And so it really looks at this idea that, it is very much a myth that the Black community has not supported Asian Americans and Asian Americans have not supported Black Americans at times of great tragedy.
Yeah, and what was like really, especially since I'm a mother, it's to hear that, I guess she said that it's when she heard George Floyd call for his mother when he was dying, when the knee was on his neck, that she thought, of her own son, like calling for her also when he was being shot by the Minneapolis police. So that was really powerful.
Yeah, her and all mothers, I would imagine, but her perspective was so much,
Cute, yeah.
more tragic and acute. Yes.
Yeah.
Tad, what are you working on?
So I think that's a great thing about the series too, is that it's such a spectrum. So I'm working on two more historical pieces. So one is on the repeal of the Emergency Detention Act. Within the Japanese American community, most people call it Title II, or it was Title II of the McCarran Act. But basically, I think for me, what's interesting about the story is that, I think for Japanese Americans, for Nikkei's, it's almost like a genre itself of World War II Japanese American camp films, museums, classes, photo exhibits. But what was interesting for me to find out was that none of that actually would have started, or the roots of our own documentation of telling our own story is rooted in the campaign to repeal Title II, which was basically justifying Japanese Americans being put in camp during World War II as a way of potentially creating camps during the late 60s and early 70s for activists and people who the government felt threatened by. And specifically, at that time, it was a lot of the Black liberation movement organizations like the Black Panthers, basically a lot of the people that were doing the work that has enabled us to be here now. They were under threat to be, to be detained like Japanese Americans were, without due process of law. And so I think at that time, Japanese Americans really weren't talking about camp, and at least publicly, maybe within, families and within households once in a while. But I think it took the fact that the government was going to use the experience that we had been in and gone through and survived, and they were going to use that as justification to do the same to other people that were actually fighting for a better world for all of us. So I think that's interesting. As much as we think about Japanese American stories about being ourselves, about ourselves, by ourselves, it really was from the beginning rooted in an act of solidarity. Another piece that I'm doing for the series is on the creation of ethnic studies, specifically the Third World Liberation Front and the San Francisco State University strike, and at UC Berkeley. Again, recently, I think in the wake of a lot of the anti-Asian attacks, as well as all the reckoning that the country's currently going through, I think finally people are realizing that education and how is super important, specifically ethnic studies, specifically learning about ourselves as well as other communities, and wanted to kind of take a step back, and even the creation of ethnic studies itself was a huge act of solidarity, literally, a third world movement. And especially, being from California, it was, a lot of the roots started here in California. So kind of taking a historical look at present day issues.
So we decided to roll out on May 19th because that is the shared birthday of Yuri Kochiyama, who was a Japanese American activist, and Malcolm X. And they formed a friendship and worked together in the Organization of African American Unity. And so there's been the family and people in the community and artists in New York created a mural about in 2016 in commemoration of Yuri and Malcolm on 125th Street and Old Broadway. It's like very close to where the Kochiyamas used to live for many years. And so we decided to start the rollout of the May 19th Solidarity Project on their birthdays with a video about them, which is made by Juan Mejia, who's a filmmaker in New York, who Tad knows also because we were all in UC Santa Cruz together. I was teaching, I'm not their age, obviously. So we'll have released 14 videos every day until June 1st. And we'll also release like infographics and image text kinds of posts. We'll be on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We're hoping people take the stories and content and do their own thing on TikTok and other platforms. And we're going to translate into like 4 or 5 Asian languages. It's kind of now it makes me nervous because we're rolling out in like just, whoa, my God, 1 week from now. Yeah, so it is this whole legacy of solidarity. We're starting with Yuri and Malcolm's story, but really the first story we're starting with that June Stinson just finished was about Frederick Douglass and Wong Kim Ark and how, they fought for the rights of immigrants and how birthright citizenship has like really helped to shape America. And they're using animation. So everybody's using like stylistically, as filmmakers, their own kind of sensibility, the kind of style of films that they make. And it's not, there are a lot of stories of Asian Black solidarity, but there also we have like the story of the Delano strike and the formation of the California grape strike, which began with Filipino farm workers, and then they joined together with the Mexican American farm workers, Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. So we're doing that story. Also, in the wake of Indianapolis, we're doing the story actually of the Sikh community, which is a community that always shows up in solidarity, like even a protest. And I've seen, Sikhs like set up a kitchen and, be feeding the protesters, support of immigrant rights and support, an anti-racist kind of work. So we're looking at post 9/11 when Sikhs were being targeted because, Americans saw somebody with a head covering and they thought, oh, Osama bin Laden. So, there was like a gas station owner in Mesa, Arizona, who was murdered by a white supremacist. And, Sikhs were really, they were being violently assaulted in the wake of 9/11. And as a community, they decided, we're not going to say, oh, we're not Muslim, because that's like saying, don't attack us, it's okay to attack them. So their principles of solidarity, was look at, our beloved community is just not only Sikh. And I think that's what Asian Americans now are talking about this past year, that, for example, like, do we want, and this is something that, Steve, I know, dealt with in Making Crime and Punishment. It's like, what does policing do to these communities? Not only Black and Brown and Indigenous communities, I mean, Asian American communities that people are being targeted by ICE and being deported. And, like from the Lee family story being targeted by police violence. So do we see the solution of anti-Asian violence really as being more policing or enhanced penalties? Or is there's another kind of vision for justice, another kind of vision for solutions that we should be looking at?
Yeah, I think that was one of the reasons why I was really attracted to or drawn to the projects, because as the concept of reframing Asian Pacific Heritage Month as Solidarity Month. Because I think me, as well as like a lot of other people, I think I have a love-hate relationship with API Heritage Month, right? Because on one hand, it's like the 1 month that all our films are shown, or it's the only one, similar to like all the other months, right? It's just like we only get kind of 1 month, and in a way we have to compete with ourselves for airtime during those, during that month. At the same time, I do think this year's is really, I think the timing of the project is interesting too, because at least for me, and I think for everyone else, for the past year, we've been in a pandemic. Even me personally, I had my second child, pretty much right before lockdown. And so I wasn't able to participate in all the protests last summer and throughout the year. And so I kind of felt very much like I wasn't able to do anything. And so I think when this project came along, it was, the timing was right, but also too, as a filmmaker, it was a way to like, okay, this is my lane that I could try to do something to contribute. At the same time, I think it's probably the first time in my lifetime where there was actually kind of this national mainstream attention to Asian Americans, maybe in the last month, which on one hand is good, but on the other hand was kind of frustrating too, because of course we're such a diverse community, that people were speaking for the Asian American community that didn't necessarily speak for me. And like Renee talked about in the beginning of this session, was that it was actually a lot of not only not positive, but it's very a negative reaction, right? A lot of racial profiling, a lot of like, oh, we need more police, we need more surveillance to protect our elders. And like someone like me is like, no, that I don't agree with that, right? And so maybe, yeah, Steve, maybe if you want to talk about too, just in general, what you feel solidarity means to you, because again, your work to me is exactly that. But yeah, maybe if you want to just talk about what solidarity means to you, both in a filmmaking context as well as just in general.
Sure. It's such a interesting question, because so many ideas dovetail in and out of this idea of solidarity. I guess going back, to a more general notion, I used to never think of myself as like, I'm an Asian filmmaker, I'm a Korean filmmaker, a Korean American filmmaker. I enjoyed the privilege of asserting that, no, I'm just, my name is Steve, I'm a filmmaker, and I'm an American filmmaker. And yet at the same time, I think like the thing we unpack as Asian American filmmakers or creatives is that over time you realize that part of wanting to own that that kind of non-Asian specific identity in some ways is part of this effort by white power structures to pigeonhole Asian Americanness and erase Asian Americanness and Asianness. And what happens, I think, when you you submit to that is to that erasure of our narratives and an erasure of our own connection even to our communities is that you stop seeing these very critical and crucial connections of solidarity that actually have long existed within our communities and between different communities. You know, you cease to see that like Asianness is not a monolithic experience, of course, right? That like the East Asian and the Southeast Asian refugee experience could not be more vastly different, you know, that to go, you know, that our grouping inhabits both, you know, migrant laborers and tech CEOs, company CEOs, and those experiences are, you know, divided up within a capitalist society and could not be more different. And so anyway, for me, it's like solidarity, I guess, is like this idea of like reimagining your connection to your community, reimagining your how you see the connection of your community to others, and actively deconstructing notions of Americanness and Asian Americanness in particular, so that we understand like how we truly coalesce around how we truly coalesce our power, you know, in the sense of that between our diverse and vital communities, we are the United States of America. We are the power that we wish to be, and that is the thing that is most terrifying to, you know, the divisive white power structures.
I think it's interesting that you use the word deconstruct too, because I agree that, you know, especially for a younger generation, you know, I think this is a moment the last year or so has been, you know, really this generation's moment of either of reckoning or of kind of realizing things need to be done. So, and I do think, you know, what has been presented, especially on a mainstream media level, both past and present, does need to be reconstructed and is very limited. And I think what's I've always understood, you know, the Asian American movement and Asian American cinema is that it always has been rooted in solidarity. And so I think that's why, you know, I think it's exciting for me to be able to do these historical pieces, is because, you know, I think a lot of focus present day within the Asian American community, which has been great, is really trying to address the anti-Blackness, you know, in the Asian American community, and really talk about both the internalized racism and the kind of, just the critiquing and taking a real honest look at ourselves, our families. But I also think it's important to remind people too that we not only have a history of that, we also have a rich history of coming together and working together. And for me, it's always been not only working together, but has been the only reason the Asian American movement really was galvanized, because it was by being inspired by other communities. And even present day, you know, I'm continually being inspired by other communities, and also too learning my own privilege, right? As a Japanese American, and really learning how I could utilize those privileges to work with other communities.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and expanding on what you were both saying really got me thinking. So it's the one way Jeff and I have been really looking at the Solidarity Project is it's like the yin and yang of Stop API Hate of 2020. And the flip side of that is Solidarity in 2021. I mean, Stop API Hate is not going away. I mean, because the incidents are going to happen, and it's such a powerful movement. But this is just, you know, kind of extending that movement into the future. And so, you know, when you talk about new generations, I mean, both of you, as well as June and Juan and some of the other filmmakers, have sometimes brand new children, babies, and, you know, have very young children. And so I think in the past year, you're raising these young children. You're in this, you know, shit show of a pandemic, you know, racial violence, you know, the fall of the global order. I mean, it's like the polarization. So there, but then intellectually, like people are really, you know, and ideologically are like really stepping up the analysis, you know, as Steve was talking about the power structures and, you know, how our lives are really shaped by that and what we have to do to fight back, what we have been doing to fight back. So, you know, I have the benefit of my elderly 22-year-old son. So it's like a different, you know, thing at home. But for, you know, when you have such young children in these times, like that must be incredibly intense apart from, you know, trying to work with like a toddler or something around.
Yeah, that's why the uh, the concept of doing a 2-minute video is I liked it versus doing a feature film because that's about as much spare time as I have. But yeah, Steve, I was actually wondering if, you know, have you worked in this space of these micro content videos, and maybe if you can talk about if you have, or what the difference or the challenge of such this, one, a quick turnaround, but also two, such a tiny amount of time to tell a story.
Yeah, I I have in the past, you know, I've done some short pieces for publications that would, you know, ask me to go out and do a piece in a region of the country. And then I always wound up sort of spending more time there than was budgeted for or asked, because I am not comfortable with short, super short form content. I have a hard time getting my bearings in a way really quickly. And I think it's, you know, it can be a very dangerous or slippery slope to kind of try and quickly coalesce what you believe the truth of the story should be. But at the same time, this was a project that I think was so important in its urgency and you know, vital to actually do in a timely manner that um, I was really glad to, you know, sign on, even though it's been super crazy. Um, Luckily, Renee, your name carries some weight out in the real world when, you know, you name drop you and your film. um, so that's been really nice to kind of see some doors open up by, you know, also more importantly by the mission of this project, right? That this, like, there's a lot of people out in the community that are really asking this question, like, how do we actively build solidarity? The other really important thing about doing short form content for me was that, you know, Renee and your team, you guys paired me up with a co-producer that is from the Hmong community in Minneapolis, Twin Cities. And so I have been amazed. Her name is Jua Grand Lee, and she is a wonderful filmmaker and educator in her own right. And working with her has been just freaking amazing because, you know, on top of like her deep connections within the Hmong community and her ability to basically like magically open up doors as well. She's just a great producer and filmmaker and thinker of the issues that we're all asking in this project. So that, I think, is why this is all possible. I would be freaking out way more without her collaboration, and also, you know, the collaboration of our subject. Tusaik is how he goes in, you know, online, but Tusaiko Lee, he is an educator, activist, hip hop artist, spoken word artist, and community builder, and he was instrumental in getting access to Mrs. Vang, Fang Li's mom. So after a long conversation with him and his ability to kind of quickly, you know, understand what we're trying to achieve with these 14 pieces, he was able to take that and go to Mrs. Vong, and get her blessing to film with her as well and tell her story.
Yeah, and the only way, I mean, we knew Jo Gran Lee through ADOC. She did one of the COVID micro stories that they did last year. I think we know you, Steve, also through not ADOC, but through the Deconstructing the Doc. Remember we met at the Doc New York, was it Doc New York? At Doc NYC, the festival, and we were having that panel on deconstructing the documentary. Then Tad through visual communications. It's like these Asian American institutions, that's the only reason, that's the door opener. That's the only reason we all know each other, we can work together, and we can even do any of this. I mean, Jeff Chang and Bao Nguyen, Bao was really helpful to this project from the beginning. And we know them through like the cultural circles, but also through their ITVS project. And then I think it was visual communications that you had at the downtown at the Regal, right? You had a screening that Bao and Jeff were at. So yeah, it's this, it's this whole, it's as PJ Raval, another one of our filmmakers, talks about, it's the collective power of the Asian American independent community.
Yeah, I think this is, I think that's what has been really good about this project too, is kind of as a reminder and reinforcing how many super talented filmmakers there are, in all our communities, and how not one of us needs to tell all the stories, right? We can kind of stay in our own lane, in our own kind of interests, because we know there's really, really amazing filmmakers to tell those other stories. I think for this project, working with Sean Mura, working with Lou Nakasako, Yuri Chung, these are all people that I've worked with before, and it's just great to be able to work with them again. I think that's the great thing too. Every filmmaker was able to build their own team the way they wanted to. So I'm sure all the films in the series will have a different flavor, a different style, which to me is really great. I think we're kind of wrapping up now, but Renee, can you kind of just, now that we've talked about what the project is and the process, can you kind of tell people where they can find all these videos and kind of how the rollout is going to happen, and the best way for people to get plugged in?
Well, one way to roll it out is just through collective power of people. Just, we'll push it out on all these different platforms on social media, and just hope that people, retweet and, pass it on. It's actually going to live. We have a partnership with the Asian American Foundation, TAF, which is the new foundation that they'll have this See Us Unite website. And so the videos will live on the See Us website. They have a dedicated solidarity page. And so that'll be the player. And then, we'll just push it out on WeChat and, whatever platform we can find. So, and it's all free, never charging for the videos. It's, we just want people to watch and use it and show friends and family and their organizations and in schools or everywhere. Also, hopefully, I know some of the content, hopefully all of the content will be on UCLA Asian American Studies is developing a digital curriculum K through college on anti-Asian hate and solidarity. And, so this idea is not like a brainstorm me and Jeff had, it's in the air in the Asian American community, like this idea of solidarity. And we've seen in the press and all over also, from the Black community, from other communities of color, people are talking about solidarity with Asian Americans. So we're partnering, and we also partnered with For Freedoms, FOR Freedoms. They do those really amazing public art, social justice billboards all around the country. And they had independently also, they had this solidarity kind of billboard project that's already rolled out, and you can see it in your local community, or you can see it on online. I mean, they're really, really amazing billboards. So it's like everybody's just thinking the same way, and we're just all connecting in different ways with our work. But thanks, Steve and Tad, for saying yes, because I don't know what we would have done to all the filmmakers. Thank you, VC, for hosting us. And I hope everybody just watches May 19th, API Solidarity.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Again, if you could keep on the lookout for these videos rolling out on the 19th, and if you could do as much as you can to help spread and share the videos. But I think the main important thing is during this month, not only it's not only a time to reflect on ourselves only, but really to reflect on the heritage of solidarity and really kind of how our histories have always been kind of intertwined, and will hopefully continue to be that in a positive way. But yeah, thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.